Alright everybody, hello, this is XP Scaling, and this shall be a continuation, now covering the overwhelming skill and techniques of Agito, the fifth fang of Matsudo. And without any further ado, let's begin. So the most notable feature about Agito is his skill, as that's actually what led to him actually reaching the title of the Fang, and obtaining his position as possibly and most notably the most skilled combatant in the Kangen series. But I'd say a very important fact about being the fifth fang of Matsudo would be that Agito technically has to scale in terms of skill to each and every individual bodyguard of the organization of Matsudo, and seeing as he is the Fang, scale quite honestly above them. Now, early on, when a rival company was recruiting for fighters that they deemed could have the potential of actually facing Agito, their choice apparently was from Japan's two most dangerous unarmed conflicts in all of Japan's history. And this company, in order to determine which criminal was the mightier of the two, had them fight to the death in order to hopefully obtain a warrior who would have the best chances against bringing down the Fang of Matsudo. Now, in the organization of Matsudo, there exists a elite task force called the Executioners, who we see later are apparently able to take down a rival mercenary group called the Black Messengers. Now, it's stated that each member of the elite execution force should scale to, if not above, a captain level bodyguard in the organization of Matsudo. A captain level bodyguard is capable of leading a whole squad of bodyguards on their own, and each individual member of the execution force, again, is stated to be above said captains. Now, logically speaking, seeing as Agito would scale to each individual member of the bodyguards of Matsudo, it's very likely he easily scales above the execution force. Now, we also hear that Agito, even before he's seen, just him being mentioned, he's stated to apparently be the strongest champion in all of Kangen Asura's history up to that point in time. And even later on, when we see Agito in his first match against Okubo, we hear that Okubo, stated by Wakatoski, is as notable as a public fighter as even Gao Lang. Now, it is a noteworthy fact that when we actually see Okubo show off his real strength, he's noted to be very strong by three individuals, one being Kuroki, the other being Ri, and one being Akoya. I can't say his name with my accent. And finally, we even see Ryan actually get very excited at the idea of fighting him. And Ryan, in his first matchup, was able to beat Robinson, who had a 48-0 win streak, yet lost to Ryan. Yet, when we actually see Agito show up and reveal himself for the first time, it's stated that many fell and trembled in fear just by meeting him. As it states, those who were seeing him for the first time immediately realized this man's overwhelming power, and those who already knew him trembled before his might once again. And this is pretty noteworthy, as through his connection with Wakatoski, even before getting to meet Agito again, legit starts to shiver and potentially have PTSD moments just by thinking about facing him again. And Wakatoski, in terms of skill, is stated to have defeated 5 very important fighters in his career. One fighter being a practitioner who apparently killed a bear in just one hit. Another fighter who apparently advanced modern-day martial arts by about 100 years. Another fighter who, along with Wakatoski, apparently has the Superman syndrome and is apparently stated to have more strength than the combined existence of all of humanity. Another fighter who apparently ruled the American underground martial arts community and as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, had a 500-0 win streak. And finally, there was apparently a man who was so talented in martial arts, it stated that he could apparently defeat Agito. And due to his unknown origin, he practiced a martial art that nobody else knew. Yet apparently, when Wakatoski fought all these people, he was able to defeat all of them, and it wasn't even a close fight. Yet throughout the entirety of the Maximum Tournament arc, here you have Wakatoski stroking off Agito and doing nothing but hype him up throughout the entirety of every match and fight that he has. Now later on, when we actually see Okubo, it's actually noted that he's one of, if not one of the top grapplers in the Kengan series, due to the fact that he fights in the field of MMA, and due to his experience in training practically non-stop in grappling throughout his whole career. He's managed to obtain pinnacle, if not peak, grappling. Now, Okubo actually trained in grappling, as it stated that grappling is proportionate to the amount of effort that you put in. And if you're on Okubo's level, it's technically inevitable that you will be grabbed and slammed by him. Even when Agito was being grappled by Okubo, he showed completely that he was comfortable grappling with him and showed to easily be relative to Okubo's skill in terms of grappling. In spite of this fact, Okubo was ready for this, as he used a synthesis of all his techniques, apparently synchronizing and optimizing them for the most optimal and ever-changing combat style, which he was actually able to briefly overwhelm Agito with. Yet we see, even when Agito was caught off guard, at one point he showed such a mastery of going limp that he was apparently able to disperse all the damage that he would have initially received from a very powerful strike from Okubo. And once Agito apparently adapted to Okubo's fighting style, he was legit able to defeat him in one blow. Later on, we also see that Oma, early on, really does not scale to Agito, as he legit soccer ball kicks him away. And Oma, even early on, was able to defeat Seki, someone who has actually fought Hatsumi before in terms of skill. And legit, Agito flat out compares Oma's current level to stepping on a pebble at this point in time. And even when Oma had regained some of his lost experience and memories, he's still compared to a much younger and less experienced Agito, due from a bodyguard who had actually fought him in the past. Later on, we see that despite Wakatoski being an op of Agito, he actually takes any advice he has very seriously and sees it as a valid point in his second match. We later on see very impressively how Agito was in fact the only person to actually be excited at the level of skill Kuroki had shown in his match against Kiryu. This is important considering many of the fighters actually viewing this fight are some of the top fighters actually in the series, and they were actually shocked, except Agito showed complete excitement at this point in time. This should be a very noteworthy fact, just mainly due to the fact that Agito at this point is not doubting himself, and is not, in my opinion, a compromised state of mind like how he was later on against his match against Kuroki. And Agito was actually able to evaluate, understand, and actually put himself in the shoes of Kuroki in this fight. And he would actually elaborate and explain just how well Kiryu was able to put Kuroki in certain positions. And again, just go into detail that Kiryu actually made Kuroki pretty much gamble in this fight. And despite that, it was actually Kiryu who emerged the loser. Later on, when Agito had to face Gao Lang, his initial choice in terms of fighting was to apparently box Gao Lang in his same stance and fighting style. Now, this is important since Agito states that he wanted to beat Gao Lang in his own style. Even when they did start to box, Gao Lang actually does go a little out of his way to admit that Agito's boxing skills were actually pretty decent. And even Okubo, at the beginning of their fight, states that they were actually pretty even in terms of boxing. Though as the fight did start to amp up a bit, after their stalemate was broken, Agito did take the first blow, and despite, in my opinion, being in a semi-unconscious state, he was actually able to still fight and was actually able to, again, to a not, satisfactory degree, defend himself. And when he came back too, his reaction to this level of skill and being on the receiving end of Gao Lang's strikes was just marvelous to him. And we actually do see that Agito, despite this, little hiccup, was actually able to improve. And the reason why he actually wanted to challenge Gao Lang in boxing again was because he believes that he could actually surpass Gao Lang's level of skill, despite the fact that Gao Lang holds the Thai God of War, or, the most famed boxer in the series. But now we have to see this and its most impressive feat, and that would be the fact that Agito is technically not going all out, as he sealed off any and every form of fighting that does not have to do with boxing, meaning that, well, yes, he could technically use kicks, obviously jabs and punches, but anything that isn't boxing related or that can be used in a boxing setting, he specifically sealed off in order to fight Gao Lang, despite knowing very well that he's putting himself in a huge disadvantage, all in an attempt to outbox Gao Lang. When Agito was actually on the receiving end in the beginning of this fight, we were actually able to see, due to this, Agito's ability to adapt would start to kick in, as the more of a beating he was able to take, the more quickly and more effectively his adaptation would appear. And despite fighting Gao Lang for honestly a very brief period of time, Agito shows just how quick his ability to adapt is, as he was actually able to create a very brand new, on-the-spot, custom-made martial art specifically catered to bringing down and outboxing Gao Lang. With how quickly Agito was able to adapt, this actually did force Gao Lang to technically unleash his true fighting form, as he had to unleash his specialized form of striking in order to technically compensate for this adaptation. And in spite of how specialized and perfected Gao Lang's strikings was, Agito was actually still able to have a bit of a back and forth with him in spite of this. And even in this, Agito showed that he was still catching up to Gao Lang in boxing in spite of his completed striking form, and was even immune to some of his techniques at this point, as he was able to see through some of them. After Agito was again on the receiving end and had received a brutal barrage of strikes, he was actually able to bait Gao Lang by apparently dropping his guard, only to then follow up with a mean hook in that brief opening. And upon doing so, we then see that it is revealed that Agito does have knowledge on the Nico style, and is willing to apparently take a risk in order to gain the upper hand in a fight against various dangerous opponents. And in the end, Agito sadly was unable to surpass Gao Lang in terms of striking alone, but he was able to use and apply Okubo's tactic of switching fighting styles very quickly in order to defeat Gao Lang. And in Agito's next match, upon winning his fight with Gao Lang, he is actually in a very conflicted state of mind, due to the fact that he was expecting to adapt and easily overcome Gao Lang, yet he had to use his tactics and a different set of skills in order to beat him and win the match. Now, this is actually very important, since this discouragement actually carries on into his next fight. And this happens to the point where the previous Fang had to challenge Agito for his spot. So this should mean that 1, Agito was in such a state of self-doubting that he actually would have lost his match against Tatsumi. And 2, this is actually part of his downfall, as we see why he loses in this tournament. This is actually so prevalent that the previous Fang actually has to go out of his way to challenge and actually help Agito improve his fighting style, just due to the amount of discouragement and shame that he felt for apparently not being able to completely overwhelm and dominate Gao Lang. Now, the way the previous Fang was able to help Agito, as explained, that apparently his formless style is perfect for adapting to and in the middle of a fight. Due to how many options that it can present, it can technically slow down and take away some of his reaction time, due to the fact that he has to choose which and what is the best technique suited for any particular moment. And if he were to sideline the formless in his fights, he would actually have fewer choices but would be able to counter any opponent more effectively, due to the fact that it would lessen the time needed in order for him to react. And mind you, this is the previous Fang that was before Agito helping him, and we actually see that this previous Fang should easily scale to Takayama, who again Takayama was able to bring down a mercenary who was so dangerous that multiple Kure clan members were actually shook and didn't want anything to do with him. Yet in spite of that, Takayama apparently is able to easily beat down this mercenary in about 3 to 4 hits. And this same Takayama again loses consistently to Agito. Now, upon receiving this improvement, Agito was so effective that despite the fact that Hatsumi in his defensive type of fighting had to actually go on the offensive in order to engage the Fang. Now, due to the reduced time needed to change attacks or techniques, Agito was effectively able to counter Hatsumi's defensive style due to this reduced time lag, as well as effectively use his dragon shot, or in this case his 1-inch punch technique. We see how specialized in striking Agito is after his fight with Gao Lang, that technically any technique in any range for him can and should be considered a knockout blow. And again, this is mainly due to his fight against Gao Lang, as just by fighting him, Agito was able to seal off his formless style, allowing him to become a striking specialist. And this actually allows Agito to now have 2 forms of fighting. Basically his martial arts prowess and his formless style, which he can apparently switch now between the two. Now, in Agito's final match, he actually had to face off against Kuroki, and even though they were both just basically standing there, their battle was described as a fight between 2 pre-initiative masters. Now, pre-initiative is when the user is able to attack the opponent by sensing their intent to attack. This is important due to the fact that Agito in this match can actually be argued not being at his best mental state, as the head of Matsuda wanted Agito to apparently simmer on the thoughts of terror and instability, and the fact that he still needs to improve after his match with Gao Lang. Yet in spite of this, Agito was still able to go toe-to-toe with Kuroki in a contest of sensing the other's inception of intent. And in this, Agito was able to initially shift the balance into his favor, although briefly. And Agito again, even though it turns out that in terms of striking, Agito would actually receive the actual blow, but Agito again was able to catch up and apparently read ahead of Kuroki by apparently narrowing down the places where he could potentially get hit. And as the fight would go on, Agito, at least at this stage, also showed that he has mastered to an extent both martial arts and formless, but most importantly being able to switch effectively between the two. Now, this switch between the two styles apparently was so effective that it's stated to be almost like fighting 2 martial art masters fighting in perfect unison. But the most impressive thing about this is the fact that Agito, even in this stage of being able to switch between both fighting styles, is still technically evolving into something much more focused and much more deeper in his skill. In spite of this switch, Agito still had a weakness that he had to overcome, which was apparently the void, or basically the time difference between switching from formless to martial arts. Now, upon doing so, he was actually able to shorten the time lag between both styles. And at this point in time, Agito was starting to again evolve into a brand new fighting style, which would be formed yet formless, and formless yet formed. But sadly for Agito, he would lose in his final match, and it's revealed by his master that he had apparently personally invited Kuroki to participate in this tournament. And with this, he had also ensured that only the most qualified and top strongest combatants in this tournament would be there, as shown in this scan right here. Now, two things that are very important to this context are the fighters actually shown here in this scan, as these fighters are more than likely the very select few, including Kuroki, who actually had a chance at potentially beating Agito. Now that said, when you consider just how many fighters are actually missing from this context, this would obviously include Oma, Cosmo, Saul Ping, Ri, Kiryu, Wakatoski, and many other capable fighters. Despite the fact that they have very impressive skill sets and techniques, these fighters technically aren't considered skilled enough potentially in their very own right, or at least, in this context, to have the capability of being seen as the most powerful fighters in this tournament. And two is that overall, Agito, despite, the disabilities and the fact that he was, in a way set up from the beginning, was actually still expected to win this tournament. And this should be, very important, just again, due to the kind of temperament that Agito had, as he had lost a good amount of his self-confidence after his fight with Gao Lang. And, one of the very few fighters who were, again, able to have the potential of beating Gao Lang ended up, being one of the causes as to why he almost lost. And it ended up taking the previous Fang to apparently help him overcome this level of distress, and ultimately it did help him rework and reinvent his fighting style, being a completely different fighter, mainly just to improve the lack and compensation that he had to overcome in his temperament. So this should really just show just how much of an esteemed fighter Agito really is, as even before he was, the king of the Kengan matches, and again, had he not been set up and had this tournament been set up any other way, it's more than likely Agito would have won in terms of skill. So now finally, let's go off the recap. So going over Agito's strength, he has been shown through scaling and statements that Agito again should be relative to a base Ryan. A base Ryan could output 112.5 tons of force, or in that multi-city block ranges of AP. But then when you consider just how important and specialized Agito's techniques are, through his striking, he could very much likely hit much harder when you consider that he can implement the adamantine kata from the Nico style into his strikes. And if you guys remember, I managed to say that the Nico style's adamantine could potentially increase the user's striking power by at least a 5 times boost, meaning that Agito, with his techniques, could more than likely hit with 562.5 tons of force, or higher into that multi-city block ranges, though that would be for his low ball. And his mid ball, I would say he can and should be relative to a Ryan using the removal, though this would more than likely be Ryan using only raw strength, and I managed to argue that Ryan with raw strength and his removal could more than likely easily output 375 tons of force, or again, multi-city block ranges. And since Ryan again believes that he was apparently able to take on Agito, Agito would clearly scale to this level of strength just through scaling. But when we take into account that Agito, again due to how specialized and optimized his fighting style is, and by the end of the tournament he became an expert striker, and again he knows how to use the Iron Breaker, again this would mean that he should have a 5 times boost to his strikes, meaning that his mid-bulk could potentially put him at 1,875 tons of force, or small town ranges of AP. But now let's actually talk about his highball. So if we scale Agito to the raw strength of a removal Ryan, who Agito himself states would scale to Julian and Wakatoski, and Wakatoski himself again was apparently stated to be able to defeat a man who was apparently stronger than the collective strength of all of humanity. And of course, Agito, who would not scale directly, but again, who should apparently scale relative to this level of strength, considering that he has fought and easily defeated Wakatoski with apparently his level of strength. Though again, this was a younger Wakatoski, but even though Wakatoski did get older, a lot more experienced and skilled, he still has like a mental scar just from that fight from facing Agito. So it's more than likely Agito, to an extent, could scale to these higher strength characters. Now, considering the fact that it has been estimated that there has been at least about 117 billion humans to, have ever existed, and Wakatoski, again, was able to easily beat down somebody who was stated to apparently match, if not be stronger than the collective history of the entirety of the human race. Now, if we, just going off of math, if we just say that the average human could hit with like 360 pounds of force in a punch, basically you multiply that by how many humans have ever existed, you would easily get up into those mountain ranges of AP for these stronger characters. And since Agito is apparently able to cripple and harm and cause apparently psychological to mental damage to these characters just to how overwhelmingly quick he was able to manhandle them, it's likely you could scale Agito to this level of strength. But if you're like me and you just want to wank Kengan Asura, which they can be wanked, let's use some of the disgusting statements and some of the disgusting implications that can be used in Kengan Asura. Now, a very important, statement if we, do wank Agito's strength would be the fact that he's arguably stated to have reached 4D levels of power, as Omari states that Kanoh has apparently obtained power on another dimension. Now, if we, say that clearly these characters are three-dimensional beings, yet Agito now has apparently obtained power on a higher level of existence or on a higher dimension, it could be argued, that's 4D or, low multiversal. And honestly, the highest level of wank that you could argue for Agito would be honestly some of the transcendence or the fact that he states that he transcends all as the Fang of Matsudo with his famous reference, "I fight, therefore I am." And, to back up some of this claim, I actually found it's very, interesting, which I initially did mess up from time to time when I actually did some of this research. I had to look up Pungo Egro Sum, or "I fight, therefore I am," which, is Latin. And Agito literally goes by an analogy, which is from, I'm probably going to butcher the name, but it's from Reni Desachartes. I'll post the name in the video. Basically, it's a philosopher who, in simple terms, uses his philosophy to basically prove self-existence and, truly being aware of one's existence. And, this is important since Agito is, at one point in the series, apparently putting his very existence on the line in order to fight Kuroki, who apparently is considered the very manifestation of martial arts itself. And, the reason why I'm stating this is important, considering that Kuroki, has the argument through scaling to easily be able to manhandle, Lehito. And Lehito apparently states that he can supposedly surpass human understanding. Now, the reason why I'm stating this is when you take into account, Pungo Egro Sum, or the philosophy sense into account in this series, we can see some of the implementation of this sense, or the self, or show of self-existence used in this philosophy. And it has been argued, apparently, use philosophy to comprehend up to the 12th dimension. And if you're into like dimensional tiering, that would apparently put Agito's level of strength into that hyperversal levels of scaling. And since Agito is basically waging his very existence in a match against Kuroki, someone who has legit stomped Lehito to the ground, and Lehito again states that he surpasses human understanding, you could probably see where I'm going at. But even if you don't want to like severely wank it like I'm giving you guys this example, you could argue anywhere again between 4D, and if you really want to, hyperversal, for the level of strength that you could apparently scale some of these Kengan characters. So now getting on to durability. So much like how I said earlier for Agito's AP, it should clearly scale to his durability, meaning that technically with just his durability and technically toughness alone, he should easily be able to endure multi-city block ranges of AP, just due to how easily he was able to take down Okubo, and Okubo apparently being able to skill and get a base Ryan excited just with the idea of fighting him. But Agito can technically boost his durability much further, seeing as he does have knowledge on the indestructible and is capable of incorporating the Nico style into his strikes, and more than likely can incorporate it into his defensive durabilities, meaning that he could much more likely push himself higher into that multi-city block ranges, as I managed to state earlier. And even if you want to low ball him, the maximum you could put his durability would be at 562.5 tons I managed to reach. That would probably be where he'd be at. But now as for his mid ball, initially I would have said his base durability would just blatantly be 375 tons or multi-city block ranges of durability, but thanks to the indestructible overall just boosting his toughness and making him a lot more durable, he could easily withstand 1,875 tons, putting him in that small town ranges of durability. And then finally, if you want to highball him and take into account, Agito has shown that he's able to take on some of the most strongest physically capable fighters in the tournament, one of them being Wakatoski, who again is capable of defeating an opponent who has stated to have surpassed the collective strength of all of humanity. And I managed to calculate bare minimum, in order to have that level of strength, you would technically be able to reach into the mountain ranges of AP. Of course, Agito probably doesn't scale directly to that level of durability, but even if you want to say he's relative to that level of durability, you could easily say he's large city level and potentially even mountain level, thanks to his knowledge of the Nico style. And then if you want to use some of the wank that I managed to state earlier for Kuroki, you could technically put him in that 4D or low multiversal levels of durability. And then if you want to use some of the higher philosophy arguments that I managed to bring up, you could put him up there at arguably around 12D or hyperversal levels of durability as a combatant. So now let's cover speed. So in terms of speed, as I managed to state before, Agito could very much likely be in that Mach 15 to potentially even Mach 50 ranges, meaning that he would potentially scale to hypersonic plus ranges of speed. But what makes, honestly, Agito a very scary fighter is not just his speed, but the fact that he has the ability to have high tier precognition. And to give you guys an example, Saw Ping, who's technically not one of the, peak skilled combatants in the series, was apparently in his fight able to see, I believe, around 11 if not 12 steps ahead and be very relative to his opponent. And his opponent, who is apparently only a fisherman, was also able to do the same thing. And that's Saw Ping. And then you take into consideration that, Saw Ping is technically leagues below, in terms of skill at least, Gao Lang, and Gao Lang was somewhat relative, if not somewhat above Agito, but Agito was legit just blocking out anything that was not relative or related to boxing in this fight. And what makes it even more scary is he's technically able to read the intention of a individual. Now, in terms of reading the intention, like, he should be a master as he is very relative to Kuroki, but in his fight leading up to Kuroki, he's honestly like in a compromised state of mind. You know, even though yes, Kuroki, in my opinion, does outscale him in that regard, when you take into consideration that Agito was set up from the beginning, it really does lead to the question of if, you know, Agito was in peak condition and if he wasn't self-doubting himself, could he have actually outscaled Kuroki's ability to sense the intent of someone's attacks? And again, as I did state before, even if you don't want to believe that, you know, Agito, Kuroki, or even any other characters scale to, like, you know, these higher levels of speed, my argument to counter that would be, you know, the argument that people bring up that Kuroki, a much younger Kuroki, was apparently able to block a bullet, and it's stated when a bullet is fired, there is no way to avoid it. Yet, you know, some of the context behind that is the shooter, Kuroki's friend, had to wear like a full set of body armor. The reason why he was doing that was because if Kuroki had apparently been able to see any part of his body, he would have been able to discern when he was going to shoot, and instead wanted to apparently train himself to sense the intention of his shooting. So, unironically, you could argue that Kuroki, Agito, and many other characters probably are slower, if not as fast, as the shooter. We don't even know how fast this shooter's reaction is, so like, even if we do, you know, give him the benefit of the doubt and say he's like peak human, that's technically nowhere near like bullet range. So I could technically, you know, make the argument that everybody's much slower, but you know, it is what it is on how you want to scale the Kengan Asura's speed, honestly. And that would technically, you know, account for Agito's low ball, but now his mid ball, as I managed to argue, can and could technically be placed like anywhere between lightning ranges, if not around the speed of light. And, you know, if we take into consideration that Ri, before he had, you know, transcended his speed, was stated to be around lightning level, and in his training he had to apparently obtain like a kind of oneness with the universe and his surroundings, and he runs into Ryan, and Ryan effortlessly catches one of his strikes, and Ri legit goes out of his way to state, oh, I have to kill this man with killing intent in order to have a chance. Now that would, you know, arguably put him at around, you know, lightning ranges or 270,000 miles per hour, or around Mach 365, already in that massively hypersonic ranges of speed. But, you know, if you want to make it a bit more impressive, depending on how you scale lightning speed, it could be the lightning strike, which I just described, or the return stroke, which is apparently 1/3 the speed of light, or, you know, in that relativistic ranges of speed. And, you know, Kuroki was able to easily time this Ri's speed just by watching him fight. And it's not until Ri gets, you know, his simp amp from his lover that he's actually able to contend and actually be faster than Kuroki. And Kuroki apparently needed to, you know, sense the intent of Ri in order to actually outmaneuver and outfight him. And then, you know, you have Agito, who's again very relative to this level of speed, given the fact that he was able to fight and nearly defeat Kuroki. So for his mid bowl, you could again, you know, put him anywhere between lightning ranges, if not like, you know, in the higher ranges of lightning, or considering just the massive jump in speed and the fact that Ri's progressively just getting faster, arguably around, you know, light speed if you want to argue it. And now finally for his high ball, considering that early on Ri was apparently able to reach, or was stated to have, immeasurable speed. Now going off of immeasurable speed should and is easily above anything that is massively high, massively FTL plus, and would also scale above infinite speed, being able to, you know, travel any finite distance in like pretty much 0 time. But immeasurable speed is having the ability to move beyond linear time. and apparently cannot be measured. Now, this can and would technically mean that, Ri should have speed that allows him to go forward or backward in time, or just, be completely beyond time itself. And then you consider that, he transcends apparently his level of speed multiple times in this fight with Kuroki. And Kuroki is very much relative to Agito, as Agito is again just adapting and improving his level of speed. You could honestly get, these Kage characters up to that level of speed, but again, that's if you use these statements pretty much like how I'm using them, just wank. So overall for Agito, he was and should have been the clear champion of the Kanken series, though due to manipulation from his mentor, and in order to have a, again, fighting chance to actually re-participate in the Kanken series, he had to, bring down his mightiest warrior in order to have a good, I guess, challenge or fun for his own sake. Also, sorry that it's taken me a while to upload. The next video will be a remastered version of Yujiro Hanma, and I hope you guys do enjoy and have a good one. Peace.